whenever you're going to be doing UV unwrapping to an object, you need to always make sure that the object is, as far as geometry goes, pretty much in its final state. And what I mean by that is any modifiers that you may have on, like a bevel or um, subdivision surface or whatever, and depending how you're using it. But you typically want to have those applied before you start, before you do your UV unwrapping, but we can just do it again because I have this bevel modifier on here. And you see, the problem is that when you have the modifiers on, the edges here look kind of screwy. But if we go ahead and apply that bevel modifier and then hop into edit mode and hit A to make sure they're all selected, and then go to UV unwrap, sphere projection, and hit tab to get back out, then that helps us out there a lot on those sides. Now something else has seemed to have gone looking a little weird. Let's investigate. I'm going to click on my texture and under mapping. Oh, for some reason it went back to generated, and we need this to be under UV. And now my little edges are looking much better on the edges there. So that's good. I've got that one set to UV. Let me make sure this first one is set to UV as well. It is good. Alright, so let's get to some of the mechanics of what's going to be going on. I'm going to jump into front view here. And now I especially had to do this with my castle because there were so many parts and it was so huge and so many bricks. But even with the project as small as this, you want to be able to start separating things in your layers so that you can edit them and make adjustments to individual items. So I'm going to put this bottom of the base tower, I'm going to press M, and that brings up my move to layer window, and I'm going to select this bottom layer, and that will put that under there. And you'll see that it's dark here because there isn't a lamp in this layer, and the texture mode is on, and whenever texture mode is on and you have a texture applied, you need a lamp to be able to see it. A light source essentially, but if you go to solid, you can still see it. But if I click back on the first one and then I hold shift and click where my second layer, then you can see it all at once. But I'm going to click back on this first layer here, and I'm going to go ahead and move the ground to a third layer as well. I'm going to hit M and put it right over here. And that way everything is separated into separate layers, and that keeps your resources from getting bogged down. It makes it easier to edit things individually. So I'm just going to click back on the first one. Also, it's a good idea while you're doing a project or anything to always keep, typically you want to keep 2 files running at, whenever you're working on something. You want to keep one file saved of your original state of your project, and then another file of like an in progress or working or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and file, save as, and I've been calling this one my Blender Sensei Exploding a Castle working file. So I save my progress to this one, and then if I get to a place where I'm ready to stop or I'm happy with how everything's looking or it doesn't seem too buggy, then I save it back as the main file. But anyway, gonna go into front view here and select our castle. We're currently in Blender render mode, and we're going to be doing some cool physics stuff. So we're going to go here and change this down to Blender game. And once the tower is selected, once we're in Blender game, you'll see this physics icon here pop up, and we're going to click it, and we're going to change the physics type from static to rigid body. I'll close that up, and we're going to make sure collision bounds is checked, and the bounds type is convex hull, and we can leave everything else the same pretty much. So now what I'm going to do is, the next few steps are really the main magic of this whole tutorial and exploding the castle, and it's really simple actually. We're just going to hit tab to go into edit mode, and then under mesh we're going to select vertices, separate by loose parts. And this is going to take a while because there's so many blocks, but the reason why we can do this and have, what happens is all the blocks that made up this tower are going to become individual objects. And because we applied the physics settings to them, they'll all inherit, every single little block will inherit the physics settings we just set on the big one. But by separating this into loose parts, since if you watch the first creating a castle video, we created these walls out of a modifier that created individual blocks. So it set us up perfectly to do this technique. All right. Real quick, make sure that you do not select off of the tower just yet. Now what has happened is this entire tower has been transformed into hundreds and hundreds of individual little objects, which are all these bricks and everything. But without clicking off of it, we want to go into object mode and then hit object, transform, origin to geometry. And this is very important because even though we just transformed this tower into a bunch of hundreds of little individual objects, they all retained the same origin point, which was the original origin point of the tower. And then so if you press P to play the game or essentially activate the physics, they're all going to act like that origin point is in the same point, and it's going to look like garbage. But luckily there is an object transform origin to geometry button for doing multiple things. So this is set up decently how we want so far. We're going to hop down into this second layer and do the exact same thing for brother base tower here. Just going to click on it, and under physics we're going to change it to rigid body and checkmark collision bounds. Make sure it is set to convex hull, and I usually collapse all my menus back up just because I like to keep things tidy pretty much. And so now we've got the physics settings for this. We're going to go into edit mode, and we're going to select mesh, vertices, separate by loose parts. Once again, this may take between 10-15 seconds to 2 or 3 minutes, but don't trip out because it will do it eventually. Just takes a little while. Computer's having to give birth to a ton of new little objects. It's a very magical maternal moment for machines. Alright, now that this has separated the base tower into individual objects, without clicking off of it, we're going to go into object mode, object, transform, origin to geometry, and all the new little objects get their own individual origins, and they all have carried over those physics settings. So I'm going to go ahead and hold shift and click all the layers to make them all visible. And then I'm going to click off of the tower, and so I've got my scene. I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick because we just did all that heavily code intensive stuff for the software, so we want to make sure while things are still running smoothly we save it.